The elephant in the room. There are trip hazards up here. It is very possible that someone will come up onto the stage today and do a nosedive. That person will not be me. Okay? I will not trip up the steps, I will not fall off the edge of the stage, and I will not trip over any of these outlets here, and hopefully I have not just jinxed myself something terrible. Okay. Just briefly, I am president of World Access for the Blind. World Access for the Blind is a nonprofit organization. It's been around for about 15 years, and it's been featured in or on just about everything. Still working on figuring out why that is, but it is. The idea here I'll get into more of. I think actually we should probably just play the video. Let me just say that World Access for the Blind has been global for some time. We've been to over 40 countries. We'll be adding, which countries? Croatia and Belize. I've always wanted to visit Belize. I will not be visiting Belize. I'm sending one of our instructors to Belize. So it's a small organization that started out with a very small handful of blind folks who had an interesting idea, and that idea had to do with transforming a lot of things, transforming the way blind people see the world, but also transforming the way the world sees blind people, which is at least as important. So let's just go ahead and play the video, and then I'll dovetail beyond that.
It's like if you guys can see with your eyes, and we can see with our ears.
I think that the sky is the limit, and I think that within the foreseeable future, we will be looking at the human perceptual system and blindness in particular very, very differently. We won't be asking the question, what can blind people not see? We will be asking the question, how much can blind people really see?
Okay, I got something very solid here.
Very solid here.
My name is Hector Elias. I am 17 years old. I am losing my vision. I am expected to go blind.
Bingo. Here it is.
Juan Ruiz.
This obstacle course here that I'm gonna do today is not just poles.
3, 2, 1, go!
It is a goal. And the bigger the goal, the more obstacles you'll face. And on the other side of that goal is victory.
Un Guinness World Record.
Stop!
E allora! E allora! E allora!
It's not a matter of enjoying it more or less. It's about enjoying it differently. You know, it's enjoying it through different vision, through another lens.
So needless to say, well, I hope it's needless to say, everyone in these videos was either totally or nearly totally blind. Certainly Juan Ruiz, who undertook the obstacle course from a bicycle, is totally blind and had not been familiarized with that obstacle prior to riding through it. Guinness World Records contacted us, wondering what sensational, remarkable thing we could do for them. 95% of the press, perhaps, of the media, have contacted us. Our promotional campaign has been, well, Kinshu would probably consider it appalling, because it's been extremely passive, okay, up until fairly recently, actually up until very recently. Largely because of lack of resources, largely because of lack of know-how. I'm not a business background, I'm not business trained, I'm psychology trained. You know what, I don't know how many of you are familiar. Is there anyone in here familiar with the psychologist Carl Rogers? Not very many. Okay. So Carl Rogers believed in non-directive, person-centered therapy. He believed that if you create the conditions in which healing can occur, healing occurs. The brain is the human brain particularly, is a remarkably adaptive instrument. The animal brain in general is. But humans are remarkably adaptable. If you think about human beings, what do we bring to the table in terms of natural survival? Not a whole lot. We don't have claws, we don't have tough hides, we don't have fur, we don't have particularly sharp teeth, we're not particularly physically strong, we have pretty good vision, but we certainly don't have the vision of a hawk, we don't have the smell of a dog, we don't have the ears of a bat. There are a whole lot of things that human beings do not have. And you thrust a relatively vulnerable, defenseless, weak, slow creature who's pretty delicate to the elements out there into the world where everyone else has claws and teeth and tough hides. And it is our brain that not only allowed us to survive, but has allowed us to flourish to the point where we're endangering ourselves and everything else. But that's a whole different presentation. So, can the human brain adapt us out of this mess? We will see, okay? But it has gotten us here. And a big part of what you have just seen all these folks do, yes, it has to do with how I instructed them, and I'll give you a demonstration of that in a moment, how I and our instructors have instructed them. We have developed ways to fast-track this brain adaptation process, but it is the brain that adapts. And a big part of what we do is actually a big part of what I think Kinshu has found a way to do, which is to set up the conditions by which adaptation can then occur. So for us, the conditions are certain things. They are get your hands off the student. They are stop over-verbalizing to the student. Stop spoon-feeding the student all this information that you think they should know. Stop imposing your assumptions about your limitations or whatever onto the student. It's a lot about pulling back. Stop intervening. Stop applying what you think you know to the situation and allow the brain to do what it does best, which is adapt. Now, the digital domain these days is very much like a human brain in a lot of ways. Not surprisingly, we designed it. Okay, so it makes sense that the digital domain would adopt and develop characteristics that are becoming more and more brain-like. And it does adapt. And it does, and things happen as a result of it doing its thing. So Kinshu comes along and sets up conditions by which whatever can occur, marketing, promotion, okay, revenue, income, knowledge proliferation, okay, information dissemination. The digital domain begins to take itself over, but the conditions have to be set up. So, one of the things that we had to do when it came to being effective is determining what conditions need to be in place for these adaptations to occur most readily. And we've developed the freedom formula that does that. And I'm going to give you a piece of that today, and then I'm going to talk about how that came into being. So flash sonar, that is what you saw showcased just now. So I'd like everyone to close your eyes for just a moment. Okay, and I'm going to make a sound. And that sound is going to stay very constant. It's not going to change, and you'll hear that the sound does not change. Okay, very static, very boring, not very interesting. Okay, but keep your eyes closed, please. I was going to use the panel, but I've decided not to use the panel. I've decided to use the screen because I think that will work as well, if not better. So keep your eyes closed, and I'm going to make the same sound, and the same sound is not going to change, but you will hear a change in sound as a result of a change in the environment around the sound. Okay, so just listen and see what happens here. Now keep your eyes closed for just a moment. I'll do it with a panel, just maybe for a little bit more clarity. Okay, now open your eyes for a moment. Now could you hear the change? You could all hear the change, okay? So that change is what allows me to not run into stuff, okay, basically. So if I and I walk toward the screen, I can bring myself to within a hair's precision of the screen without touching it, without ever having touched the screen. I know it's there, I know what it is, and I know where it is, okay? And so do you. Actually, close your eyes once again, please. And I would like you to keep me from running into the screen, please, by listening for the change in sound as I approach the screen. Okay, so all you really have to do is just say stop. That would be a good thing to say. Just say stop when you first hear the sound start to change. That will mean that I have begun approaching the screen. Okay, keep your eyes closed, please. And when you hear the change start to happen, just say stop. Okay, open your eyes. Not too bad. Okay, not too bad at all. For your first time, with no training, okay, well done. Some of you were first, some of you followed, some of you didn't say anything, but that's okay. There's always a range. All right. How quickly that happened, how quickly that took place. Because we set up certain conditions, one of them being close your eyes, right? And some other conditions, some silence in the room, and just a tiny bit of coaching, okay? But imagine what happens when you have days or weeks or months of years of developing upon this conditioning. It completely changes the face of how the brain processes its information. It activates the brain to process information in a different way. It basically hooks your ears to the visual parts of your brain. Okay, so if you do any of the research, you'll find the brain scan research that talks about the fact that the visual centers of the brain are the part of the brain that, for people who use flash sonar, become active. So how did this happen? My parents basically understood the first element that I'll talk a little bit about, which is challenging what we think we know. Okay, it was said earlier today, essentially, if you do what you've always done, you get what you've always gotten, okay, which harkens to conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom would have us remain where we are. Conventional wisdom, it's the job of conventional wisdom to maintain the status quo. And blindness is very unconventional. And what is conventional about blindness is what conventional wisdom would tell us about blindness, which is all of the things that sighted people experience when they close their eyes or when they're in the dark. And what are those things? Vulnerability, insecurity, helplessness, incapacity. And those are the things that are projected onto blindness. I said in my TED Talk, and it was a quote that became quite proliferated. I just say stuff. I have no idea what's going to be proliferated out in the media. That impressions about blindness are far more threatening than blindness itself, than the physical limitations of blindness itself, okay? And the impressions of blindness are what are projected upon blind people. So a big part of what we do is to decondition those impressions. Now, my parents, fortunately for me, did not labor particularly under those conditions. They challenged convention. They understood somehow, instinctively, probably not consciously, that they, as sighted people with eyes closed or in the dark, are blind, but not adapted to blindness. So a blind person who has adapted to blindness does not exhibit the characteristics that are conventionally attributed to blindness any longer. Okay? You do not see incapacity. You do not see insecurity. You do not see neediness or helplessness or vulnerability anymore. Okay? Once that adaptation has taken place. The problem is it is rarely allowed to take place. So how that pertains to me in how I've developed World Access for the Blind, from humble beginnings to I'm not quite sure what, is that many, many things were told to me that could not or should not be done. Okay, a blind person hears all the time, day in and out, what you should or shouldn't do, what you can or cannot do, etc. For example, I am an orientation and mobility specialist. So an orientation and mobility specialist is someone who teaches blind people how to get around. That's basically what we do. Okay? And prior to 1996, blind people were not allowed to enter this profession. They could not be certified. In fact, right on the application for certification was the question, what is your visual acuity? And if your visual acuity was lower than 20/40, you were summarily disqualified. So I'm the first person to become certified as an orientation and mobility specialist. Now, to this day, we hear all the time that what you have just seen in that video earlier is impossible. It cannot be done. Well, it's in the video. Well, lots of things are in videos that, that didn't really happen. Okay, so we do a live demonstration. Okay, then you're special. You're unique. You can do what you claim you can do, but you cannot teach it. So then we teach it. Okay, you can teach it then, but we can't teach it. So there's always this, yes, but. There's always this conventional veil, conventional wisdom veil that comes into play that we have to put aside, okay? And you do too. I mean, anyone who innovates, anyone who comes up with any kind of a new idea has to meet some kind of resistance. When I first spoke with the executives from Kenshu, when I was first invited to Kenshu, I jumped online and I thought, okay, what is this? And I jumped online and tried to find out what Kenshu meant. I have to say, I could not find it online, just saying. Okay? I looked pretty hard. So, didn't know what it meant until this morning. Okay? But jumped on the website, and I don't have the business background, so I went through this, and I still couldn't understand, what is it that these guys do? And what is it that I'm supposed to talk about? So then we start talking with the executives, and he's explaining the whole thing about the marketing and the digital media and how it all fits together, and my brain is starting to glaze over, and I'm thinking, I wish I could get this. It sounds really exciting, and TED this morning just really gets you on the edge of your seat, like this is just really incredible stuff, but what is it? What is it that's so incredible? What is it that's so wonderful? Okay, that's my resistance. That's not really your fault, okay? But it's something that you have to negotiate. And you will have to negotiate this with lots of people, including me. Okay, I'm not won over yet. I mean, I'm won over that it's wonderful and exciting, and I'm won over that I should be won over, but I'm not won over just yet. Okay, so part of it is figuring out what are the conditions, and part of it is figuring out what specifically are the challenges, because the brain will adapt to whatever challenge is presented to it, but it needs to know what the challenge is. It needs to know what the parameters are, okay? So if we want our business model to adapt, if we want our staff to adapt, our employees to adapt, if we want our clients to adapt, I have to adapt in order to understand this whole marketing thing, okay? We have to present the challenge clearly, and we have to present the conditions clearly. My parents essentially presented my condition to me as a blind person clearly by making it very clear that if I didn't adapt, I was going to run into a bunch of stuff. Because they weren't going to be there to stop that from happening. Okay, another thing that I said earlier, and it's followed me through the media and through the years, was running into a pole is a drag. But never being allowed to run into a pole is a disaster. Okay, and that's what's happening with our blind folks. It's actually happening with our sighted kids as well, unfortunately. Okay, so the problem here is universal. But blind people are particularly vulnerable to it. So, frankly, I was allowed to run into all kinds of stuff until I learned how not to. Now, the next thing that came into play for me was very simple. Actually, it was quite simple for me, and that was befriending the unknown. So, if you're blind, lots of things are unknown. The world is a pretty big, staggeringly complex, rather unknown thing all around you, okay? And you've got some choices about how to address that. You can make the unknown knowable, okay? Flash sonar does that, the cane does that. I know where the edge of the stage is. I don't have to worry too much about it, and I don't, okay? You're probably much more worried about it than I am. So, befriending the unknown. It's not just a matter of getting comfortable with the unknown. It's a matter of getting up close and personal with the unknown, because the unknown's really okay. So what you can know, you know. What you can't know, you either delegate to someone else to know, okay? So other people can figure out what it is that you don't know. Or you just roll with it. You roll with what you don't know. Don't worry too much about it, okay? So for me, I did just that. The unknown was just not that big a deal. Because when you are blind, you live in the dark, and the dark is man's most primal fear. It is the fear that underlies everything. It is the foundation of fear. Fear of the dark, or broadly speaking, more broadly speaking, fear of the unknown. Okay? So it's really synonymous. Fear of the dark is just a concretized experience of fear of the unknown, which is man's most primal fear. And a blind person who's adapted to blindness does not have that fear anymore. So the foundation of fear for a blind person who's adapted to blindness has been removed. Consequently, you don't experience fear anymore, particularly. Okay? Sighted people, as a culture, our way of dealing with the unknown is to just put more light around. It's dark. It needs to be more light. There needs to be more light. Put more light. Light here, light there. Light everything up. Now we don't have to worry about the dark anymore. And there's merit for that. There is. But it doesn't address the fear. The fear remains. Okay? So what we have done is we have gone right to the root of the matter, and we've basically made people unafraid. Now, if you dropped me in the middle of the Sahara Desert, or you dropped me in the middle of some unknown mountain range somewhere, I feel like I would find a way to manage. Okay? I mean, I might have a sleepless night over it, but I wouldn't be overly concerned about it. I know, because I've kind of done that to myself. In fact, it was one of my ways of addressing some of my final fears. I've always wanted to go hiking. I've always wanted to go into nature on my own. Always found excuses not to do the thing I've always wanted to do. Until the time came where I could no longer make excuses. And I went out there and I taught myself how to manage alone in the wilderness as a blind person. So that fear is gone, and when that fear left me, most fears were left behind as well, except starting my own company, which was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever done. Okay? Never mind being stranded in the middle of the Sahara Desert, piece of cake. Never mind being stranded in the middle of a mountain range, not a problem. Starting one's own company. So any kind of business and any kind of business venture and any kind of business frontier is all about somehow developing a relationship with the unknown, because you don't know stuff. You don't know what your clients are thinking. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next year. You're guessing. You're making educated guesses. And some educated guesses are better than others. Okay? You don't know how your staff is going to respond. There's a whole list of things we don't know. And that is one of the things, the major thing that sometimes keeps us from doing what Yoav talked about, which was doing something different. Because anytime you move to do something different, you are walking right into the unknown, okay? So I wish I could say very simply, well, just get rid of that fear. Don't have it anymore, okay? You go through one of our workshops, you come out the other end, and you probably do get rid of it. I mean, most people do. Certainly our blind students do. So, you know, I can show you how to do it, but I cannot tell you how to do it. I can do it. I did it, okay, myself. And that I can pass on. All I can say to you is be aware that that's what it is. It is fear of the unknown that nags at the root of every fear you have, and that has the potential to erode your capacity to address any challenge you face. And if you're aware of it, you know, then you're halfway to addressing it. And the last thing I'll just mention briefly before we go on to question and answers is just simply something I call reconnoitering, which is if you're blind, the way you navigate and the way you manage your environment has a lot to do with what I call discovery and recovery. So it has to do with finding your way and then finding your way into some place you didn't really want to be, or some place where you're now not really sure where you are, and so now you have to recover. Okay? And recovering requires basically just pulling back, preferably to a familiar place, someplace you know, and reviewing your situation. And that's a pretty common kind of a thing for a blind person to be able to do. It would be similar to maybe you driving into, you know, a city or town you've never been to before, and now you're trying to find your way around, and then you get hopelessly lost until you figure out, I'm familiar with that. So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to have a think about what to do next. Okay? That's kind of what I'm talking about. Growing our business, such as it is, moving from, you know, a handful of countries to 40-plus countries, we made plenty of mistakes. And we overextended ourselves, you know, I'd like to say once. I have a saying, I try never to make the same mistake thrice. So it involved pulling back. It involved regrouping. It involved reconnoitering. It involved being very clear that we've made a boo-boo here. We've made a mistake. And the faster we recognize we've just done something wrong, the faster we can then go and try to make it right. Okay, and that, I think, applies to all of us. And it certainly applies, well, it's applied to me personally. It's applied to me professionally as well. In fact, I'll talk about one of our mistakes, and then I'll open it up for questions. It was a mistake that we made back in the first phase, challenge everything you think you know. And I'd meant to talk about this then, I'll talk about it now. I've been giving high-profile speeches for a long, long time, but most of the speeches I've given have been instructional workshops. So I tend to be a, let's get out there and do this kind of person. I don't tend to be the, let's stand up here and talk about it kind of person. Okay, so this is a little bit new for me. But back in 2001, I did a speech for United Way. And it was a keynote for United Way. And then someone pulled me aside and said, you know, I was looking over your material, looking over your website, such as it was back then. Now it's very extensive. Even I get lost in it. And he said, your message is universal. He said, you know, who's your clientele? Well, you know, it's blind folks. And how many of them are there? Well, a handful. And those are the ones who are paying for your services. You know, they can't really pay for our services. Okay, so you're marketing to a slice of clientele who can't really pay for your services. So how are you going to manage? Well, we're a nonprofit, we'll raise funds. And he made the argument to me that what we have to teach is something that would be of universal interest. And I didn't get it. I heard him, but I did not listen. And I did not adapt my own thinking. World access for the blind. We work with blind people. Okay? That's what World Access for the Blind does. We're actually looking to do a name change coming up here. Okay? And it'll probably be World Access Vision. Because vision is actually what we're about. So, 15 years later, I'm getting it. Okay, I got it. I will be here through lunch, so if anyone has interest or has further questions or interest in following up on anything, I will be here through lunch. I will have to leave after lunch because my time up here I'm from Long Beach, so my time up here in the area was pretty limited. But I'm happy to stay through lunch, and I'm happy to take any further questions or address any further comments. Thanks so much.